They handed me the badge like it was the last shard of dignity I had left. My name was printed at the top in the glossy script they'd used for everyone. Under it, in black capital letters, 3 words stabbed into the paper like a verdict. It was small, meaningless, and absolute, an official seal that said I could stand in the room but I did not belong to the family that owned it. I slipped it around my neck, felt the cheap plastic press against my throat, and for the first time I understood that a single label could rearrange the shape of a life. The hall shimmered with chandeliers. Laughter and clinking glasses swelled like a movie soundtrack behind a smile on my face. People looked at me the way you look at an exhibit, interested, polite, removed. My mother caught my eye across the room and smiled with a slow, satisfied calm that felt worse than anger. She had arranged this. She had watched me enter with that badge in her hand and decided it would be the perfect punctuation to a story she had been telling for years. 1 hour later she took the microphone, and what she said did more than humiliate me. It opened a door that had been shut on the truth for 20 years. My name is Maya Bennett. I grew up inside the kind of family photographs that look like instruction manuals for happiness, coached smiles, coordinated outfits, and the proud outline of a legacy that had to be preserved at any cost. My brother, Andrew, was the son of that orbit. He was athletic, charismatic, and, importantly, obedient. My mother, Lillian, measured love and achievement in optics. She believed lines were for people to stand behind, never to cross. It pleased her when neighbors admired their lawn, when family friends complimented the table settings, when people assumed the Bennett name meant integrity. I was the shadow they tolerated to keep their portrait complete. Quiet. Distant. I studied literature instead of law school, chose a modest apartment instead of upgrading to their townhouse, loved differently and smaller than they did. Those choices, to them, felt like a refusal, a blemish on the narrative they'd already printed. When Andrew got engaged to Claire, a woman whose career and charm glinted like the crystal in those photos, my mother declared the wedding the year's principal act. I imagined the day would be a bridge. Maybe I would finally belong. Instead, the guest badge told me how she saw me: allowed, tolerated, but strictly controlled. Limited access meant I could smile, eat, and stand in the portrait, but if the family's image needed polishing, I would be asked to step back. It was containment masquerading as etiquette. It was cruel and bureaucratic, and it was public. I thought my heart would break from humiliation. It didn't. It cracked open instead. Behind the crack I smelled something older and more dangerous: fear, and the memory of secrets that had been kept so long they had calcified into rules. The reception glittered with polite warmth as servers poured champagne and the string quartet played arrangements of songs that should have felt timeless. My badge sat heavy on my chest like an accusation. Guests who would once have greeted me with the ease of childhood now paused, brows lifting politely, not to welcome, but to question. Why was she here? Andrew moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of a man who always knew where he belonged. He found me at the edge of the dance floor and mouthed an apology that didn't reach his eyes. He didn't understand, not because he was wicked, but because he didn't know the story behind my distance. Andrew had grown in a different room from mine. He had been taught the angle of a smile where mine had been taught silence. My mother's speech was scheduled as a gentle benediction, an ode to family. She wore the smile she preserved for photographs, a smile that had no responsibility to truth. She cleared her throat, and the hush that followed felt like a held breath across the whole room. Then she did the thing she'd rehearsed, the cut that landed like a blade. Without naming names, without confronting anything direct, she described families who drift, who choose paths different from ours, and she thanked those who still choose the group, the tradition, the line. Her gaze found me and held. Lillian used the public stage to teach me obedience in front of the town. Whispers rippled around the tables. Phones brightened with covert cameras. Someone outside the hall coughed, the sound like an applause detached from meaning. My throat closed and my vision tunneled to the badge that lay against my collarbone: limited access guest, and I knew humiliation alone would not be my end. On impulse, I reminded myself of why I had left. It wasn't rebellion for the sake of it. It was a slow unspooling of small cruelties. My mother's late-night critiques dressed up as concern, the way she decided my friends were not appropriate, the tuition offers that dissolved into conditional gifts. Even small favors in that world were strings to be pulled when it pleased her. I had learned that love with conditions is not love. I had learned that survival sometimes required leaving the set where a director cornered you. I had also learned the quiet power of listening. In the weeks leading to the wedding, while pretenses grew thicker, I overheard conversations that had the smell of money and threat. Men spoke in clipped tones about developments, about contracts, about municipal approvals. Names repeated like a pattern: Mercer, Holt, and Ralston, in offices that meant leverage. When my mother spoke about protecting the family, there was something behind the words that tasted like fear. I didn't know the details, but I felt the edges. The knowledge that some reputations were maintained not only by courtesy, but by bargaining, and possibly silence bought with ledgers. After her speech, a dozen guests offered hollow consolation. The bride's mother squeezed my hand, awkward with discomfort. Andrew's father hovered with a jaw set in unsureness. I smiled because smiling is how we are taught not to ripple surfaces that must stay smooth. Yet in my palm was a plan forming like a seed cracking open. Humiliation will end with truth, not with silence. I did not want a spectacle. I wanted a dismantling. When the band slowed and the next toast was announced, the room softened into intimate light. People shifted toward the center as if the whole evening were about to condense into a single capsule moment. My mother's speech had done its work. I could feel the tilt in the room, eyes either sympathetic or perpetually curious. I waited. I bided my time while everyone took their sips and polished their smiles. I readied for something nobody would see coming. Because humiliation can be answered by many things: tears, rage, retreat. I chose another, naming the truth slowly so it made the listeners uncomfortable inside themselves. I rose and walked to the microphone, clothed not in accusation but in steadiness. For weeks I had drafted words that could not be shouted. I had peddled thought like a flower. Now there was no more RSVP line to hide behind. The mic felt cold in my palm. I could hear the pulse of chandeliers and the slight rustle of chiffon. Maya, the bride's cousin, whispered, helpfully. You shouldn't. I raised my chin. I should, I said quietly. Because I don't belong to the limited access vocabulary my mother has been using. A ripple went through the room. Someone coughed. The pianist stopped playing mid-phrase. I began without anger. The story I told was an inventory of small facts that proved a larger pattern. I spoke of childhood dinners where compliments were ledgers, calculated, recorded, and later used to justify decisions. I spoke of my mother's gifts that came with contracts sewn into the seams. I spoke of the way appearances mattered more than needs, of the way kindness came with expectations, and how the household practiced a version of loyalty that was submission. My mother's face tightened. She sat like a statue who'd been given a word in a language she didn't know. I did not shout. I did not weep dramatically. I told specifics: a tuition withheld unless a career path bent toward the family business, a relationship dismissed publicly as impractical and privately as shameful. I spoke of therapy sessions I had when I was 19, when the world felt small and sharp, and how she spun them into gossip, a daughter seeking attention. I said the names of men who had come to our home to speak about projects that needed to be moved along as if cities were chessboards and people were pawns. I said that when I was present at certain meetings, I saw file folders tinted with numbers and dates and cross-checked payments. I said that when I had questioned where some donations went, I had been warned in quiet tones, not everything is for the public record. There was a sound like breath released across the hall. Phones suddenly angled toward me. My mother's false, calm smile began to fracture into lines of disbelief. Then I did something that felt like a cut and a stitch at once. I pulled from my bag a set of documents I had copied in the weeks before the wedding: receipts, emails, photos of contractors meeting in private, transfers that traced to shadow companies. They were small, bureaucratic things, but when placed together they painted a pattern. Andrew, I said, turning to my brother, who stood with the bride now watching in surprise. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to assault the celebration. But I can't be folded again into narratives that erase me. I explained that I had come not to take revenge, I had come to offer choices. You can accept what the night has been scripted to be, I told him, or you can choose to stand with truth. We can continue to let the image be more important than the people sitting inside it, or we can repair things honestly. My father, who had sat quiet through the evening, suddenly lifted. His face was old with a particular kind of regret. Maya, he said, voice thin, we made compromises. I thought some of them were necessary. My mother's mouth had become a hard line. You will not speak to my daughter like that, she snapped. Not here. The wedding paused into a pregnant silence. For a moment everyone watched the family fold reality into itself again. The same choreography we had practiced for years. Then something shifted. A few people in the room, those closest to us, stepped forward with small confessions. A niece who had suspected, a family friend who had questioned certain donations. The bride placed a tentative hand on Andrew's arm and said, "Do you want to know more? I don't deserve a marriage built on secrets." That was when the worst of the math of family power faltered. My mother, who had wielded reputation like a sword, felt the world she had shaped tilt. Her face registered a weight I had never seen, the dawning recognition that the people she loved would no longer accept a world where appearances were the only currency. She tried to pivot. She called me cruel. She rationed tears. She offered theatrical indignation. But the pieces were already in motion. The ledger of small evidence, emails, transfers, meeting notes, could not be undone by performance. Security arrived quietly, not as enforcers on my side, but as custodians of peace. They politely asked for calm. Andrew turned to his mother and then at last looked at me properly. not with an apology only half-formed, but with a man realizing his inheritance had been bought with more than money. "I don't want a marriage that requires this kind of humiliation," he said to the room. "If our family is built on secrets and fear, I want nothing to do with it. Maya, will you come speak with Claire and me, not as our mother's property, but as my sister?" The room dissolved into stunned murmurs. "My father, at last, told us that he'd tired of hiding. We've kept so many things for the sake of image," he admitted. "Maybe the image isn't worth the cost." The mic went silent for a long time. Then the band began again with a slow song that felt less like ritual and more like a nervous beginning. When Andrew clipped my badge off himself and pinned it to his lapel as a symbol that I was welcome without conditions, it wasn't a dramatic gesture of victory, it was a choice to stand for something else going forward. It was not the end of the harm, but it was the beginning of a different story. The story did not vanish with the night. There were conversations, sometimes legal ones. There were ruptures no apology could immediately solve. My mother and I did not become reconciled overnight. Some family dinners remained difficult. Some friendships fractured, but what changed was the atmosphere of silence. Secrets began to leak out of the tight pipes where they had been forced. Men and women who had felt the cost of preserving image began to speak softly but insistently. Things were not to be covered up anymore. Contracts that previously moved without scrutiny now required accountability. Andrew committed to a foundation that would publicize donations and ensure transparency. Claire, who became a sister to me in a way that mattered more than ceremony. I read their messages in the quiet of early mornings and started a small project that held their letters and names and offered them a place to be seen. My mother eventually moved away for a season, the way some people do to avoid what they have caused. She wrote letters that contained apologies thin as gauze and sometimes directives that were as controlling as the old ones. I read them and set them down. Forgiveness takes time. Andrew's marriage did not collapse, it began differently and honestly. The town still noticed us. But the badge line, the red ink of limited, it no longer held the power to define me. On quiet evenings, when the porch light is on and the house settles like a tired animal, I still feel the weight of that badge in my palm as a reminder. There are moments when a single word can mark you. But a single word can also be the first stone in rebuilding. People who are told they are less can make themselves whole again by choosing to show up as themselves, not as someone else's image of them. If you ask me what to do when your place is made small by someone you love, I will tell you this: name it. Speak clearly. Bring witnesses. Let the story be told in a way that cannot be folded away. Humiliation loses its power in sunlight. Truth, once voiced, carries its own gravity, and sometimes gravity rearranges the furniture of a life for the better. The mic that night had been a weapon when my mother held it. When I took it, it became a tool. I used it, not to destroy, but to insist: I am present. I am full. I have no limited access to my own life. And when Andrew unclipped his badge and pinned it to me, the metal warmed against my dress like a small benediction. The guests applauded, not for drama, but for a new possibility, that families can be remade by courage and that the public performance of love can be replaced, eventually, by the quieter labor of truth.